As the sun disappeared beyond the hills, the Sea of Galilee glowed peacefully beneath the evening sky. Peter, one of Jesus' disciples, prepared to head back out onto the sea as evening settled over the shore. That evening, Jesus came to the shore and decided to sail out onto the sea with Peter and the other disciples. Jesus stepped into the boat, and together they sailed onto the sea while he taught the crowds from the water. Exhausted from a long day of teaching, Jesus rested in the stern of the boat and quickly fell fast asleep. Peter and his companions gripped their oars, faces tight with fear as they battled the rising darkness and rough sea. A disciple gripped his oar tightly as he struggled to steady the boat in the darkness. The boat cuts through the dark water, leaving a white wake that shimmers like stars under the rising mist. Peter sits in deep thought as the boat glides through the night, his face reflecting the heavy silence of the open sea. While the disciples watched over the dark sea, Jesus rested peacefully in the boat. Suddenly, the air shifted. Dark storm clouds twisted above the sea as fear began to fill Peter's heart. Without warning, a violent storm swept across the sea, and Peter shouted as waves slammed against the boat. Peter's face tightened with fear as the powerful storm grew more dangerous. The wind roared. It hit the boat like a physical weight, catching the broadside and forcing the vessel to heel hard. The water, once a calm mirror, erupted. Jagged, dark peaks surged upward. Rain and waves flooded the boat as the disciples struggled against the raging storm. Peter clings to the mast, shouting through the wind as his companion fights to keep the boat from capsizing. A disciple stands frozen in awe as a massive wall of water towers over the boat, ready to crash down. Another one bails water from the deck as the boat begins to sink under the weight of the storm. They scramble across the slick deck, desperately reaching for ropes as the boat tilts violently. The other men row with grit and grimaces, their muscles straining against the relentless surge of the storm. Towering waves crashed around the boat as the disciples searched desperately for safety. The disciples clung tightly to the boat as giant waves crashed around them in the darkness. The storm grew stronger as waves poured into the struggling boat. Peter braced himself against the rocking boat as massive waves crashed through the stormy night. The frightened men cried out as the storm grew even more fierce around them. While the wind howled and waves crashed around the boat, Jesus slept peacefully through the raging storm. Peter fell to his knees in fear and crawled across the rocking boat toward the sleeping Jesus. Peter and the disciples gripped the soaked wood as crashing waves tossed them through the storm. Peter reached out to wake Jesus, his voice lost in the roar of the wind as he cries out for help. Peter and his companion cry out in desperation as they wake Jesus, fearing for their lives. Peter shouted, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" As the storm tossed the boat violently across the sea. Peter watched in fear as Jesus calmly stood in the boat while the storm raged around him. The disciple watched in amazement as Jesus faced the storm without fear, while lightning flashed across the dark horizon. The frightened disciples watched closely as Jesus prepared to face the fury of the storm. Jesus walks across the flooded, broken deck with supernatural calm, while his disciples tremble in fear. He turned toward the howling void beyond the railing and raised a hand. He did not shout. He did not strain. "Peace! Be still!" Jesus commanded, and in an instant, the roaring wind vanished, and the raging sea fell completely silent. As Jesus looked across the peaceful sea, the calm water shimmered beneath the moonlight. The water turned from a churning black abyss into a mirror of glass. The boat stopped its violent rocking. The only sound left was the rhythmic dripping of water from the gunnels back into the lake. The men stood frozen, hands still clutching the wooden bench, their mouths hanging open in the sudden, deafening silence. He looked at each of them in turn, his gaze lingering on the trembling hands of Peter. "Why are you so afraid?" Jesus paused and then asked Peter, "Have you still no faith?" They stared at each other and tried to comprehend the power they had just witnessed. Their faces were pale with shock, and they sat speechless in the quiet night. In the stillness of the night, the disciples whispered in amazement, "Who is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" One of the disciples stared silently at Jesus, overwhelmed by the power he had just witnessed. Still soaked from the storm, Peter realizes that the man standing before him is far more than just a teacher. The disciples returned to their oars, rowing in a stunned, holy silence. After witnessing his power over the sea, the disciples knew Jesus had truly been sent by God.